Medieval Eastern Europe, a brutal place in a brutal time. The Eastern Roman Empire is on the brink of collapse, now only holding on to Constantinople. The only thing stopping the Ottoman Empire carving its way through Christian Europe and stack-wiping Hungary is a few small voivodates. Voivodates? Just gonna... That one. Today I'll be focusing on the voivodate of Wallachia, specifically a man they call Dracul. A man who would breathe nightmares into every janissary who was forced to face him. A man whose, according to some, tyrannical rule is imprinted deeply into the history of Eastern Europe and Western popular culture. The son of the dragon, Vlad III Drăculea, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler. The father of Vlad III, Vlad II Dracul, or Vlad the Dragon, grew up as a hostage of the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg. In 1431, Vlad II would be inducted into the Order of the Dragon, created by the aforementioned Sigismund, in order to curtail the power and expansion of the Ottoman Turks, who by this point controlled a large chunk of the Balkans and almost all of the territory the Eastern Roman Empire once held. This would earn Vlad II the nickname Dracul, meaning dragon, from the Latin Draco. All voivodes of Wallachia were descended from Basarab I, the founder, who broke away from Hungarian vassalage to make Wallachia a proud, independent state. This, of course, lasted for exactly 5 minutes, although not literally, because the Ottomans and the Hungarians were right there. And allowing someone small to be independent and not part of their machinations, well, we couldn't have that, could we? Vlad II's brother, Mircea cel Bătrân, or Mircea I the Elder, had passed away in 1405 Anno Domini, having reigned over Wallachia on 2 separate occasions. In fact, by 1436, 5 of Vlad II's half-brothers, 5, yes, had sat on the throne of Wallachia, as staying faithful to your spouse wasn't really a Wallachian ideal, and that this led to a lot of infighting and backstabbing, and the average reign of a voivode being 2 to 3 years. Compounding this issue was the fact that Wallachia was surrounded by incredibly powerful neighbours, the Kingdom of Hungary to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south. Both of these would at different times financially and militarily aid certain claimants for the throne of Wallachia so that their preferred candidate would get into power, and then when inevitably the two powers went to war, the voivode of Wallachia would come to their aid. Except the second their preferred candidate get on the throne, the other side would then finance someone else. Yeah, Wallachia wasn't in a good spot. Now, I know that's hard to imagine today. I mean, could you imagine if there was a slightly less powerful nation caught between 2 powerful ones? One straight up funding certain candidates or activities, maybe pulling resources out of that country, and another outright invading to push its own interests on a people. I mean, could you imagine that? This is hot, I'm taking it off. I'm sorry, Taylor Sheridan, I threw the cowboy out of the bed. In what was likely 1431, give or take a few years, the future Vlad III was born, with some reports saying he had piercing green eyes, although most portraits of him portray him with brown eyes. His mother was most likely Eupraxia of Moldavia, although it could have been any of Vlad II's many, many mistresses. See, Henry, you can be a scumbag and get it on with as many women as you like. You don't need to behead 2 of them. However, despite foggy facts surrounding Vlad I's earliest years, destiny would soon call to him as one of his father's brothers would pledge fealty to the Ottoman Sultan, enraging Sigismund, who would fund an army of Wallachian boyars so that Vlad's dad could take his place as the voivode of Wallachia. This meant that Vlad III would move with his parents to the city of Târgoviște, the capital of Wallachia. So, all's well that ends well. Vlad II is sitting on the throne of Wallachia, and he's got protection from Sigismund of Luxembourg. Except not for long, because Sigismund passes away right away, and at the exact same time, the Ottomans go, we don't really want you on the throne of Wallachia, so guess you won't be. To figure out a way to survive, Vlad II took a meeting with Hunyadi János, the voivode of Transylvania and a Hungarian vassal, looking to him for support. Vlad II would then remain completely neutral in the next inevitable conflict between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, which infuriated Sultan Murad II, who called for a meeting of his own. Vlad II took his 2 youngest sons to this meeting, the future Vlad III and the future Radu the Handsome. When they arrived, they were all immediately captured, and around the same time, Vlad was briefly replaced with Basarab II by Hunyadi. The lesson here is either side is ready to literally imprison and or replace you at a moment's notice. This is the mindset all Wallachian voivodes had to live under. Not only protecting their people, their realm, their resources, their immediate family was under constant threat. If they didn't make a perfect balance between the Hungarians and the Ottomans, and as you can see, that was quite literally an impossible task. Now, Hunyadi's actions led to Vlad II being released. However, he had to leave his 2 young sons behind as hostages, similar to how he grew up as a hostage in Sigismund's court. This was designed so that he would stay loyal to the Ottomans. As part of this deal, Vlad II had to promise 500 Wallachian boys to become Ottoman janissaries, basically slave soldiers. Here's where things would change drastically for Vlad III. Of course, he's a hostage in a foreign court. He was no longer studying under his Catholic parents. Instead, he was studying under the Ottoman Sultan. Here he would learn about the arts, science and philosophy, as well as various martial skills such as swordsmanship and horsemanship. Vlad would excel at the latter. However, he hated living amongst the Ottomans, and he had a very strong will, resisting them at every turn and suffering the lash of a whip on multiple occasions. His brother, however, came to love his Ottoman captors, studying his Quran, maths, logic, and possibly even converting to Islam as he grew closer to the Sultan's son, the future Mehmed II, possibly becoming lovers. To say this is highly contested would be an understatement, but I'm going to go with it because I know it's going to annoy some people. Vlad would excel at learning Turkish, and this is incredibly important for later, as he went about the Ottoman court, using it as time to study his enemy, how alliances were formed and broken, their military drills, their battle plans, how they would function as a cohesive society, how that cohesion could be broken down from the inside. The Ottomans were literally giving a crash course on their number one hater, or for their number one hater, on how to beat them. During their time as hostages. Vlad and Radu would bear witness to many horrors committed by their Ottoman captors to other hostages. One such time, they saw 2 other hostages blinded by the Ottomans because they were secretly communicating with their father. Then, one day, Vlad and his brother found themselves stripped of all their privileges and sent to Tokat Castle, with some archaeological evidence providing secret tunnels and 2 dungeons at the castle, although we can't be certain that they were kept there. This was because the Crusade of Varna had begun and Vlad II had to fulfill his obligations to Hunyadi, so he sent a small contingent under the command of Mircea II, his eldest son, in 1443, sending another tiny contingent when he saw Hunyadi's forces. Basically, again, trying to keep that balance of middle ground. He's like, oh, well, I did help them, but just a little bit, just enough for them to not depose and butcher me, and just enough for you to not butcher my sons.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
George R.R. Martin must cream himself when reading Eastern European history. Now, whilst Vlad II was technically neutral, news of his son Mircea's fighting prowess reached the Ottoman court, and the Ottoman Sultan was once again infuriated by Vlad II's seeming oath-breaking via his son, because technically neutral in the eyes of someone at war is not neutral. Vlad III caught wind of this and realised his father had risked his and Radu's lives for the sake of the Crusade, which ended up failing anyways. Vlad II would resubmit to Murad II and was surprised to find his 2 youngest sons were actually still alive, and this status quo did hold for a little bit. Then Hunyadi marched south into Wallachia to place Vladislav II on the Wallachian throne instead. 90% of research for this video was, wow, what guy took power this week? Vlad II was unsuccessful in defending his throne, and in 1447 he would pass on, killed in the swamps of Balteni. Balteni. I got it right! I got it right! Yes! But he did die, so that was sad. Mircea II fought on, but eventually was captured and blinded with a red-hot poker and buried alive by rival boyars. Vladislav II then took the throne. According to folklore, Vlad II then gave his pendant and sword to a loyal boyar called Kazan, who then rode for 5 days, delivering the pendant and sword in the style of the Order of the Dragon to Vlad III. In other more mainstream versions of the story, Murad II tells Vlad of his father's passing, hoping that his thirst for revenge would now be transferred onto Hunyadi and Vladislav, and that his seriousness would actually make him a better ruler than his brother Radu. To put it bluntly, the Ottoman Sultan couldn't see Vlad defecting because, obviously, he would hate his father's and his brother's killers more. Right. This would begin Vlad's first campaign for the Wallachian throne as the Hungarians attacked the Ottomans in Ottoman-controlled Serbia, in Kosovo. See you in the comments. Vlad was given an Ottoman cavalry force whilst also relying on support from local Ottoman governors along the Danube River as he marched on the capital of Târgoviște. Finally, he claimed his throne. But not for long! Because a very, very bitter Vladislav was now marching back from his defeat with what was left of his Wallachian army. Vlad would initially be styled as Vlad III, and he would ascend to the Wallachian throne in 1448. However, in just 2 months, Vladislav would return and Vlad would be dethroned, initially fleeing back to his Ottoman captors, until Vladislav realised the Hungarians were in disarray and offered no protection to Wallachia. So he sent envoys to the Ottoman court. Obviously, already being in power, he was much more useful to the Ottomans, so Vlad had to flee the Ottoman court because he was now useless and his life was much more expendable. Vlad fled to the nearby voivodate of Moldavia, where his uncle, Bogdan II, was now voivode, and his cousin, Stefan cel Mare,
Ștefan cel Mare.
Stefan cel Mare, otherwise known as Stephen the Great, which is amazing. You have Bogdan, Murad, Mehmed, Vladislav, Vlad, Vladimir, Basarab, Stephen. It's funny, he's probably one of the most important historical figures in the history of Romania, and we will cover him one day. But yeah, to all the Stephens in the world, you can do it. You can be Stephen the Great. Especially if you like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get notified for whenever I upload a video. And especially if you comment, and especially if you share this video with all of your friends, and if you watch to the end, even if you have it in the background while you're working, that guarantees you will do well in life. Over the next few years, Vlad actually led a happy life, finding a friend in his cousin, and even helping his uncle to defeat a Polish force, although sadly, this would abruptly come to an end, and in drastic fashion. Bogdan's brother Petru Aron had finally increased his plot power enough in order to assassinate Bogdan and claim Moldavia for himself. However, before he could go full Crusader Kings paradox please sponsor me, Stefan and Vlad managed to make their escape. Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, Murad II had passed away, and his son Mehmed II ascended to the Ottoman throne and immediately declared his goal of conquering Constantinople. Prick. This move was entirely predictable. The city of Constantinople had huge historical, religious, and cultural significance for the citizens of Europe. Being a former part of the Roman Empire, being the last vestige of the Roman Empire, being the seat of Orthodox Christianity, and, most importantly for the Ottomans, was the key to the Silk Road in Europe, linking one end of Eurasia to the other. Really, it was only a matter of time before the Ottomans made an attempt on the city properly. Back in Moldavia, Vlad and Stefan had begun a cat-and-mouse game with Hunyadi, moving from town to town to avoid the former ally of Vlad's father. However, whilst Vlad and Hunyadi were nominally enemies, Vlad having been put on the throne by the Ottomans just before he lost it, and Hunyadi having killed his dad, the politics of the situation had begun to shift. Obviously, Vladislav had now allied with the Ottomans, and Hunyadi had lost his power as the regent of Hungary and now was just a simple voivode of Transylvania. To Hunyadi, Vlad represented someone who hated the Ottomans and could be a staunch and powerful ally against them. To Vlad, Hunyadi represented a path back to power, as well as a valuable ally inside the Kingdom of Hungary. Vlad now allied himself with the man who had forced his father from power and aided in his passing. Vlad would join Hunyadi's court, and Hunyadi would become Vlad's patron, beginning the process of introducing him to the Hungarian court and even taking him to the coronation of Uzulot Laszlo, or Ladislaus V, the Posthumous, given the nickname because he was born after his father's passing. Vlad swore to protect Europe from the Ottoman menace and be an ally to the Hungarians and the Catholic Church. That Catholic Church part caused a little bit of a problem with the Wallachian boyars. You see, whilst Europe was mostly Christian at this time and the Protestant Reformation wouldn't happen until 1517, there was still a little bit of a division between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, known as the Great Schism. And Vlad had just very openly, distinctively and clearly sided with the Catholic Church. He had sided with Rome. In 1453, horrible news struck Christendom. Constantinople had been conquered by the Ottomans, and its emperor...
Konstantinos Dragasis Palaiologos.
Or Constantine XI Dragasis Palaiologos, passing away whilst valiantly and defiantly defending the last vestige of the Eastern Roman Empire from the invading Ottoman Turks. In a sense of twisted irony, given the topic of today's video, the Ottomans impaled their prisoners around the city to deter any hope of reclaiming it. Hunyadi made no effort to defend Constantinople, nor did he make an effort to retake it. He did, however, clash with the Ottomans 3 years later when they tried to take Belgrade, whilst Vlad defended the pass into Transylvania to make sure the Ottomans didn't take Hunyadi in the rear. Much like Radu was currently taking Mehmed II in the rear. Allegedly. Hunyadi victoriously arrived at Belgrade just in time to attack the Ottomans and save the city. With the city now secure, Hunyadi would go on to help Vlad reclaim his throne, defeat the Ottomans, and restore the eastern... No, plague went through the camp and killed everyone, including Hunyadi. However, even with the passing of his ally, Vlad saw an omen that would change his life forever. Halley's Comet. In the 15th century, this sighting meant one of two things. Either a great calamity was coming, or the comet foretold of great events. Vlad looked into the sky and settled on this being a sign. It was time for him to reclaim his throne. Vlad would lead a small army of exiled boyars and mercenaries from around what would one day become Romania against Vladislav at Târgoviște. The story diverges here. In some, the two armies meet on the field and brutally clash, whilst in others, they stand by whilst Vlad and Vladislav duke it out in a brutal one-on-one. In both versions, Vlad kills the man who killed his father in hand-to-hand combat. Vlad returned to power on the 15th of April 1456. Or July, or August. However, he immediately had a problem, because the Ottomans were frothing at the mouth, because their ally had just been defeated, and they had just had their asses handed to them by the Hungarians. So Vlad graciously paid the Ottomans 2,000 gold, and allowed them to move their troops freely through his land. The second issue that Vlad had to contend with was that the boyars were loyal to Vladislav. In fact, they were so loyal that a couple months into his reign, a boyar known as Albu the Great raised a mercenary army against Vlad. And here Vlad would begin the form of execution that would grant him his nickname. He would ambush the mercenary armies before they even reached Târgoviște, and he impaled them. Some of them while they were still alive. Vlad then made his next move. He sent spies to investigate the boyars who had helped in the overthrow of his father. Then, in Easter 1457, Vlad held a feast for all the boyars who had been involved in the killing of his father and his brother. During the meal, there was a commotion, and everyone left their seats to see what was going on outside. Outside, the oldest members of these families were being impaled, whilst those who were fit enough to work were then marched down to rebuild Castle Ponari. Vlad would then work these former boyars until they passed on. Some would pass from exhaustion, others from illness, some from injury, and on the odd occasion... That's right, you guessed it, some of them were impaled, some of them... I know, I was shocked. I was shocked to find that out. Now, Vlad made his next move. See, Vlad very accurately assessed that the Wallachian boyars had been just as damaging to Wallachian stability as the Hungarians and the Ottomans had been. He very quickly moved to centralise power so that he could make decisions without the boyars voting against him or blocking him or just simply overthrowing him. This led to Vlad purging all but 2 of his boyars between 1457 or 1461. Long story short, you were either loyal to Vlad or you were, As you can tell by the darkening of the light, I have come back a little later. He then replaced these boyars with loyal followers from his exiles, mercenaries, and even raised up some boyars from the lower ranks of the Wallachian nobility. This ensured complete and utter loyalty. Anyone in his court owed Vlad everything. Quite literally, the reason for their success. Much is like Jon Snow and Sansa Stark should have rewarded the loyal houses in the north and taken down those rebellious ones and taken away their ancestral homes, because that's the smart thing to do, have everyone loyal to you. But then again, we have to open up the can of worms is season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones, and then you have to open up the can of worms that George R. R. Martin is almost certainly never going to finish those books. So I think we'll just skip that. So that is how Vlad treats his nobility. But what about everyone else? The regular Joe Schmo, or a merchant per se? Well, funnily you should ask. There is one story involving a merchant in which he visited Târgoviște on his way to Constantinople. He asked Vlad if he could protect him and his goods overnight, and Vlad obliged, saying he could. Just leave your goods in the public square. The next day, the merchant awoke to find that his gold was missing. Vlad was furious. His word had been tainted, and he promised that the gold would be returned and the thief would be caught. He then turned to the townsfolk of Târgoviște and promised them that if they did not hand over the thief in due time, he would just destroy the city. That was his answer. If the thief didn't turn up, the entire city would just go. Well, probably a lot less and a lot more. However, alongside this, he ordered his servants to replace the missing gold for the merchant in a sack that contained 1 extra ducat, or ducat, however you want to say it. Later that day, the merchant returned to his cart to find the gold had been replaced, but he also found 1 extra ducat. He immediately went to Vlad and reported the extra ducat now in his gold sack. At the same time, the thief was being brought to Vlad for justice, and Vlad calmly explained to the merchant, had he not been honest and replaced the extra ducat, he would have joined the thief in his punishment. Vlad was a harsh but arguably fair ruler. Rich or poor, you would be punished the same. He would reward loyalty and honesty whilst brutally punishing anyone who broke the laws of his land. In fact, he often disguised himself and patrolled the streets of Târgoviște to ensure everyone was following the law. Alongside his march for justice, Vlad took a particular disliking against the lazy, the beggars, the drains on the Wallachian state. So he came up with a solution. He held a massive feast for all the beggars in the land and invited them, come one, come all. And once they were all gathered under one roof, he sealed the doors and burned them all alive. He literally did the Mitchell and Webb sketch.
So, Minister, we've run every viable model through the computer, and it looks like there just are no easy solutions to this recession.
Yeah, raising VAT, cutting VAT, raising interest rates.
Raising interest rates and VAT, lowering income tax and raising VAT.
None of it seems to really help.
Have you tried kill all the poor?
Now, this campaign for justice is now sounding a little less fair. And some have described it as a terror campaign, probably because of the burning homeless people alive stuff, but also probably because of the following. Thieves were beheaded, the lazy people that Vlad didn't get in the massive fire he impaled, and women who committed adultery he either skinned alive or impaled. Their lovers would then be forced to eat their flesh. Probably the breasts, or possibly the breasts, or maybe the breasts. I heard some conflicting stories, but eating of breasts was mentioned. Sometimes he had impaled the lovers after. Outside of Vlad's campaign for justice, the Romani people would be suffering uniquely, being enslaved in a form of slavery that predated Vlad the Impaler and would last long after he was gone. Sometimes the Romani people would even be forced into the Wallachian army, and sometimes they would just be burned alive. Now, how much of this terror campaign actually happened and was as terrible as is described, we don't truly know. Mainly because Vlad's cruelty was exaggerated even in his own time by his enemies, who obviously wanted Vlad to look bad. But we'll dive into this a little bit later on. Slightly to the north of Wallachia were the Saxon-settled cities of Transylvania. Bystris, modern Bystra, Konstrat, modern-day Brazov, and Hermannstadt, modern-day Sibiu. These cities would have some mixed relations with Vlad over the course of his second reign. His relations with the Saxon cities began when he supported the Hungarian general Horogozezi Székely Mihaly.
Mihaly Szilágyi Horogzegi.
That one. And Hunyadi in a rebellion in Bistria against the Habsburgs. Vlad would then come to see the Saxons as friends. Then the city of Sibiu started spreading rumours that Vlad had renewed his vassal status with the Ottomans, and Vlad was a little pissed off. I say a little. Relations with the Saxons worsened when Vlad imposed a series of tariffs on them in order to curtail their dominance of local trade and also enforce support for Wallachian merchants. Tensions then really began to rise because Ladislaus pressured the Saxon cities to move away from Vlad because he was clearly not a Hungarian vassal, and also the Saxon-controlled cities held two different claimants to the Wallachian throne. They were literally harbouring people who wanted to steal his throne. Of course, he was going to be a little upset. Does it justify what he did next? I want to say no, but I've been playing Crusader Kings recently. In Sibiu, you had Vlad IV the Monk and Basarab III the Old, and for this, Sibiu would find itself burned to the ground. After many years of incredibly tense relations and a new king of Hungary ascending the throne, Hunyadi Matthias, or Matthias Corvinas, the son of Hunyadi Janos, a third pretender would be recognised, primarily in Brazov. This would be Dan III, the pretender. Vlad would then launch an attack on southern Transylvania and the outskirts of Brazov. Once he was done, he attacked Brazov proper, and once the city had fallen, he impaled many and burned many more alive. Many of those he killed had actually been supporters of the boyars whom he had already sent to God. So this was low-key, just sort of clearing up old business to Vlad. Now, it is alleged that after the Saxons had been defeated, Vlad held a feast amongst the bodies of those who had passed on, and dipped his bread in their blood. However, it is incredibly unlikely that this happened. Vlad then had 41 Saxons who had come to Wallachia to learn Romanian executed, believing them to be spies. It's at this point the Hungarian king held his hands up and went, "Enough is enough," and forced the two sides to make peace. Vlad promised that he would pay damages for the vast amounts of damage he had done on his campaign. The Saxons promised Vlad that he would have sanctuary should he ever be deposed again. Vlad then promised to protect the Saxons from any foreign incursions, primarily precluding to the Ottomans and not himself, because he had just been busy pummeling them into the ground. However, there was a catch to this. The Saxons had to pay Vlad and Mihaly to fund a mercenary force of 4,000 men that would be on standby should the Ottomans ever show up. You know, mercenaries that are notably loyal and wouldn't leg it when an 80,000 strong Ottoman force showed up. Also, on top of this, that's a mercenary force who is being paid for, like, they're not paying the mercenaries directly. They're paying Vlad and Mihaly to pay the mercenaries and get it all set up. So if the mercenaries are going to be loyal to anyone, it's going to be the direction the gold came from. In 1457, Vlad went to Moldavia to help his cousin Stefan reclaim its throne. Stefan would then help out Vlad by helping to repel Ottoman raids. Shortly after, in 1460, Dan III the Pretender decided he would have a go at pressing his claim on the Wallachian throne. However, this was short-lived because Vlad captured him after a battle. Now, Vlad couldn't just let Dan live. He had actively pressed his claim and was a live threat. So, Vlad kindly had a priest read a eulogy to him whilst Dan was still alive. He then made Dan dig his own grave, after which he was beheaded. After this, Vlad's old friend and ally Mihaly was captured by the Ottomans and questioned. Whatever answers he gave, they would cut him in half. And Vlad flew into a rage. Vlad had another problem. Ottoman slavers who were going around kidnapping people to become slaves, particularly women and young girls who were kidnapped to force into sexual slavery, similar to the slavers that Grace O'Malley fought off when we covered her story. So, how did Vlad the Impaler deal with a bunch of sex pest slavers who were going around looking for blondes and redheads to force into a harem? I'll give you a quick second to guess how he dealt with it. He burned them alive! No, I'm joking, he impaled them. Around the same time, a few Ottoman envoys visited with Vlad. However, they refused to take off their turbans in front of the Wallachian voivode, who was deeply insulted and wanted them to take off their turbans to respect him. Both sides were at a complete impasse, refusing to do what the other asked. So Vlad decided to help them out by nailing their turbans to their skulls so that they would never come off again. There are other versions of this story in which it was actually Genoese merchants who had visited Vlad and they just simply refused to remove their skull caps, and then the story plays out basically the same. Whilst Vlad was busy being a pain in the Ottoman side, they were actually more upset by something he did at the very start of his second reign, or more so didn't do. He had promised to pay them tribute, and he had done it once. The Ottomans were really not happy about this, so they arranged a meeting where, much like Vlad's father before him, they planned to capture him. However, this plan backfired when the Ottomans were ambushed by a decoy party which then fired down upon them with hand cannons, which are as cool as they sound. Probably not so cool when they're aimed at you. 3 envoys were then captured by the Wallachians. 2 Ottoman, 1 Greek, and they quickly found themselves staring at 3 large sticks. One slightly shorter than the others, and this was for the Greek diplomat. They then were impaled, whilst Vlad continued on with a trap of his own. Vlad dressed as a Turkish officer and rode up to the fortress at Girju.
Giurgiu.
Speaking perfect Turkish, he demanded entry into the fort. Once he was inside, Vlad had his men rush in and very quickly and easily took the fort. The fort was captured and Vlad had essentially declared war upon the Ottomans. Vlad and his army then crossed the Danube River and began impaling and burning people in their own homes. He then wrote back to the Hungarian King Matthias to disclose his exploits. I have killed peasant men and women, young and old, who lived in Obliția and Osvelu, where the Danube flows into the sea up to Rahova, which is located near Chilia, from the lower Danube to such places as Samovit and Žižan. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut off by our soldiers. Thus, your highness, you must know I have broken the peace. As a gift, or simply as a sign of intent, delivered alongside this letter was a large bag of heads, ears, noses of the people discussed in the letter. Matthias looked on as Vlad, instead of being the buffer state, had started the next conflict. In response to Vlad's brutal incursion into the Ottoman lands, the Grand Vizier Velay Mahmud Pasha led an army of 18,000 seeking to take III-lea. The Grand Vizier was successful and immediately began doing to Wallachia what Vlad had just done to Ottoman-controlled Bulgaria. However, as the Grand Vizier attempted to return to Ottoman territory, he was caught by Vlad, and in the ensuing battle, Vlad and his forces would claim the lives of 10,000 Ottomans, winning the fight. Now, Vlad antagonised the Ottomans like this from a place of confidence, because in the past, as we've discussed, Wallachian voivodes were consistently playing a balancing act between Hungary and the Ottomans. Vlad sought to end this arrangement, to end the Ottomans. Now he's in his Daenerys arc. So the reason for Vlad's confidence? Well, Pope Pius II and the Venetians had raised money for a crusade against the Ottomans, and it looked like Europe would finally unite against this invader that was bearing down on their doorstep. Except the proud Christian kings had taken the money and filled their own coffers, or used it to finance campaigns against each other. Amongst these kings who had betrayed the Pope, who had trusted them all, was King Matthias. Now, the order of events in this war, as well as the goals of either side, are murky. However, it is likely that the Ottomans probably just wanted to put Radu on the Wallachian throne as a staunch ally or friend. In a twist, another Ottoman war goal was to help Stefan take one of Vlad's fortresses, whilst Vlad's was simply for Wallachia to survive and defeat Mehmed II, fulfilling the oath that his father had sworn all those years ago when he joined the Order of the Dragon. In 1432, Mehmed and Radu took a break from playing kiss chase, allegedly, and crossed the Danube, meeting Vlad on the field of battle. Vlad opened the battle by firing his cannons, and the Ottomans returned fire with theirs, and Vlad immediately went,
"No thanks, I choose life."
He was outnumbered heavily, the Ottomans having between 60 and 70,000 men, as well as 120 cannon, versus Vlad's roughly 10,000 peasants and a few cannons. The situation was so bad for Vlad that his brother alone was leading 4,000 cavalry. Vlad retreated. Mehmed had taken literally every tool he had at his disposal. Imams to gain the support of Allah, astrologers to check the stars, and comfort women to alleviate the soldiers. Slaves. He took sex slaves. But all of this was to defeat Vlad. That is how terrified of Vlad the Impaler Mehmed was. At this point on, Vlad went full-blown guerrilla tactics, sending word ahead to the peasantry to flee to the Carpathian Mountains and burn everything they left behind. This would force the Ottomans to starve, as they couldn't scavenge fresh supplies, and so they relied on everything that they had brought with them. Alongside this, Vlad also ordered the peasantry and his own men to poison all the water sources. Vlad had animals slaughtered en masse and ambushed Ottoman columns with his horsemen. Vlad knew that the Ottomans would slice through Wallachia like a knife through Mamalia. His only hope was to make conquest unviable for them, or for his allies to actually enter the field. At the moment, Vlad is doing the wartime equivalent of doing all of the homework, whilst Matthias is there for the presentation at the end. Vlad's methods would become more and more extreme, and he quickly turned to biological warfare. sending those infected with tuberculosis, syphilis, plague, and even leprosy into Ottoman-occupied towns and camps. He would have these agents dress in the Turkish fashion and have them intermingle with the soldiers. However, the Ottoman host was simply too great, and in time, they approached the capital. Once camped outside Târgoviște, Vlad sent scouts to the Ottoman camp outside the city walls, and according to legend, one of these scouts dressed as an Ottoman was Vlad himself. Their goal was to find the Sultan's tent and plan an attack. On the 17th of June 1462, the night attack at Târgoviște took place, with multiple versions of the story, the most common being that Vlad's army managed to sneak up to the camp and launched a surprise attack, Vlad making his way to the Sultan's tent. The battle raged for 3 full hours until around 4 in the morning. Here, stories truly diverge, with some saying Vlad made it to the Sultan's tent, but the Sultan was nowhere to be found, or in the confusion, they simply could not find Mehmed's tent. Some slightly different versions of the story do exist, having Vlad simply lead a cavalry charge straight at the Ottoman force. However, the ambush is more likely, with the Ottomans simply being unable to alert everyone, and when they did manage to get everyone up in the confusion, they actually ended up attacking each other just as much as they were attacking the Wallachians. In the end, Vlad lost 5,000 men during the ambush, and Mehmed lost 15,000. The only issue was that Vlad would feel his smaller loss of men far more than Mehmed would feel his bigger loss. Vlad knew that the end was drawing near. The game was up, and he prepared for one final confrontation. He would then take a further 2,000 man loss and retreated into the mountains with the last of his men. Mehmed and his army were now severely battle-weary. They had taken severe dents going up against Vlad's forces, even though they had technically been successful. So, they pushed on to the capital to place Radu the Handsome, a loyal voivodate, on the Wallachian throne, where Mehmed decided to finally turn round. But on his way out, he had left one of the most viciously brutal scenes in all of human history laid bare for the Ottomans to see. The forest of the dead. 20 to 23,844 bodies impaled on spikes stretching out for 2 miles, arranged in the shape of a crescent. The bigger number, exactly the number Vlad had told Matthias he had killed. The smell of the macabre art piece was said to be unbearable, and the Ottomans could do nothing but watch as birds began to circle and land, then feast on the rotting flesh of their fallen comrades. At this point, Mehmed retreats and leaves Radu to finish the conquest. Vlad is defeated, there's no one left to fight, but if a Hungarian force shows up now, Mehmed knows he'll lose. His army doesn't have morale left. Who would, after seeing 23,844 of your own people impaled on spikes in front of you? However, some sources do say that when they entered the city, they found people in spikes, but when I was researching, it did seem to lean that it was before he got in the city, and it was the crescent formation. History is brutal, man. However, the end result was still the same. Vlad's second reign as the voivode of Wallachia had come to an end. Radu pushed on, and the boyars unsurprisingly switched sides, supporting their new voivode. According to legend, as Radu approached Ponari Castle, Vlad's unnamed first wife, possibly Domna Anastasia Maria Holzsland, I feel like that was an insulting pronunciation.
Doamna Anastasia Maria Holzanska,
the mother of Mahaina cel Rău, stood on the cliffs near the castle. She declared she would rather feed the fish than be taken by the Turks. After this, she threw herself into the river below. On the retreat, Vlad would manage to defend his Black Sea fortress from Stefan and send word to Matthias that he was in desperate need of help. Matthias, the king of Hungary, who had been paid to fight a crusade against the Ottomans, didn't want to fight the Ottomans, so instead of marching to aid Vlad and fulfill his promise of crusade, he forged a letter. The letter stated how evil and cruel Vlad was to his fellow Christians, and that he had been secretly trying to ally with the Ottomans the entire time. Vlad was unaware of Matthias's betrayal, and met with him, and was promptly captured. Matthias, on the other hand, hoped that he would be made Holy Roman Emperor for capturing this traitor. You're probably beginning to see why you can't trust all of the vicious and vile acts that Vlad is accused of, because even his allies were making stuff up about him. And so, with this, the exile of Vlad the Impaler began. For 14 years, Vlad would now be a prisoner of the Hungarians. The political cogs that had forced so much instability on Wallachia would keep turning, and Radu and two other claimants would basically take turns sitting on the Wallachian throne. Yet, locked away in Castelul Corvinilor, or Castle Corvin, there was little Vlad could do for his suffering homeland. However, Vlad did manage to eke out a life for himself in Hungary. Eventually, he was allowed to settle down, and was even allowed to marry Mihail's daughter.
Justina Szilágyi Horogsegi. Horogsegi Szilágyi Justina.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to attempt that. It would be really offensive.
Ilona Szilágyi.
Is the other name I've heard her referred to as. I probably could have done that one. Ilona Szilágyi. Hope I didn't offend anyone with that one. Vlad at this point would also go on to completely convert to Catholicism and have 2 children with his second wife. Funnily enough, Vlad was actually incredibly peaceful during this period, aside from one story where a thief broke into his home to hide from the guard, who then obviously turned up and demanded Vlad grant them entry into his home. He refused, and the guard captain tried to force his way in, so Vlad executed him on the spot. Vlad defended himself, saying he was entirely within his rights to refuse entry, and entirely within his rights to defend his home. And Vlad suffered no consequences for this. His defense worked. Imagine being able to defend your home if an intruder comes in without having to worry that you'll go to jail if they catch a cold whilst inside your house. During the Voivode Buckaroo that Radu and Basarab III, Cel Batran, or Basarab the Old, were playing in Wallachia, Vlad asked Matthias if he would support his claim to the throne. The Hungarian king agreed to support Vlad's claim, but not support him militarily. What he did allow him to do, however, was move more freely within Hungary and settle in Transylvania, where he could gather a base and support to actually reclaim his throne. This freedom would test to see if Vlad could be trusted not to try and flee Hungary. It also served a heavy dose of irony that Vlad was angry and attacked the Saxon cities for harbouring claimants whilst he was on the throne, and now he was off the throne. He was the one going around Transylvanian cities searching for a base of people to support his claim to the throne. After a while, Matthias had Vlad lead military expeditions into Bosnia, as well as providing aid to Vlad's cousin, Stefan, after his relationship with the Ottoman Sultan soured, and he invaded Moldavia. The Ottomans and the Ottoman-allied Wallachians invaded Moldavia in 1475 and were finally beaten back by Stefan at the Battle of Vaslui. The then voivode Basarab III turned on the Ottomans, attacking them, hoping that the resurgent Kingdom of Hungary, and by extension Stefan, would have feelings of sympathy towards him and his newfound loyalties. They did not. So, obviously, this failed, and Stefan supported Vlad's return to the Voivodate of Wallachia. Around the same time, Radu was trying to reclaim the Wallachian throne for himself, but passed away in the process. With his passing in 1475, the local boyars and a few local principalities would begin to support the return of Vlad. Meanwhile, Vlad dressed his forces as Ottoman Turks and marched towards Srebrenica. I apologise for my pronunciations for this thing. My rule is I try and pronounce the places how the locals would pronounce them. I'm from Essex. My tongue's not that good at it. Once inside the city, he impaled every Ottoman he could find, ripping Ottoman peasants apart and revealing their genitals. This was so no Ottoman would dare counter him. I also imagine he had a lot of anger held up in repression over those 14 years. Think about it, at this point, the Ottomans had taken everything from him. His friends, his family, I mean, the Hungarians kind of took those as well. To be honest, Vlad had just been screwed over by everyone and everything, aside from his first wife, who he kind of screwed over by abandoning. It wasn't really nice. Of all the thingies I've mentioned today, that's the bit that upset me. Don't abandon your missus. Commit war crimes, but don't abandon your missus. That's going to be at my English internet censorship trial, isn't it? Within months, a Hungarian army was marching on Târgoviște. The united armies of Vlad and Stefan just missing a fleeing Basarab who made his way to the Ottoman court. What a wimp. Like compare that to Traddy Vladdy, who was like, yeah, no, I'll do one last stand, and then I'll flee to the Carpathian Mountains. I want to make absolute sure I've lost. And then there's Basarab like, nah, I'm good. I'll just run back to Mehmed. Just 2 months in to his third and final reign, Vlad would be caught in an ambush from the Ottomans and Basarab whilst on his way to join a larger battle. According to the stories, Vlad was killed by an Ottoman Turk who was dressed as one of his own servants and attacked him from behind. Vlad's bodyguards would do their best and defend him fiercely, with only 10 of them surviving the attack. Eventually, Vlad's forces were simply overwhelmed, and Vlad was killed. His body was beheaded, with his head sent back to Constantinople to be impaled on a spike. Local monks would later find what was left of his body and bury him in their crypt in Snagov, seeing him as a defender of Christendom. Not everyone saw Vlad as a defender of Christendom, though. His Russian counterparts saw him as a heretic due to his conversion to Catholicism, and others simply believed that his body would not rest in its grave. Another resting place for Vlad the Impaler could have been the monastery of Comana, situated between Bucharest and the Danube, fairly close to the location of Vlad's final battle. In total, it is believed that Vlad the Impaler killed between 40,000 people and 100,000 people during his campaigns against the Ottomans, obviously creating an incredibly split legacy. Some, in his own time and to this day, see Vlad as a bloodthirsty tyrant. In 1499, a Nuremberg woodcut depicted Vlad dining next to an assortment of impaling bodies, whilst pamphlets of his foul deeds were bestsellers during the 15th and the 16th centuries. Newspapers in Germany would sell the gruesome tale of Vlad's reign, whilst the populace would spread rumours of their own. Well, so today it's the Daily Mail on TikTok telling us World War III's around the corner, and back then it was Hans telling you stories about Vlad the Impaler. Journalists, you never change, do you? On the other hand, many saw and still see Vlad the Impaler as a heroic defender of Christian Europe and Wallachia, also by extension, modern-day Romania. During the 15th century, most leaders were incredibly uneasy about coming to blows with the Ottomans, aside from the Hungarians who did a few local power matches and wouldn't eventually be pushed back by the Ottomans. Vlad, in his tiny little state, pushed back against the Ottomans, against impossible odds, and carried on fighting when his allies, who had promised to be there for him and promised the Pope they would go on crusade, didn't show up. Yes, he did some awful stuff, but that takes some titanium testicles. Not only this, you have to bear in mind, this is during a time that the Roman Empire fell. 1453, Constantinople fell. The Ottomans seemed inevitable and unstoppable, and Vlad still decided to go up against them. Part of me sees that as foolish, and part of me sees that as incredibly brave. In fact, the Ottomans grew so powerful that even Vienna would suffer a siege in 1529, and then again in 1683. However, that time, the Winged Hussars arrived, which was my second ever video, and an amazing Sabaton song, which was the inspiration for the video. Yet, Vlad the Impaler joins an extremely small list of Christians who are willing to stand up to the encroaching Ottoman menace. Vlad, Skanderbeg, and briefly in defiance of Constantinople, Constantine XI Palaiologos, would try to halt the Ottoman expansion and just simply survive. This incredibly limited list of names places Vlad as a hero and true defender of Christendom in the hearts of many in Romania today, as well as other parts of Europe. After the passing of Vlad the Impaler, the political cogs of Europe actually got more complicated as the European leaders began to look inwards at the growing power of the Habsburgs, leading France to ally with the Ottomans in the 16th century. The Ottoman Empire continued to expand until, like all empires, it succumbed under its own weight and collapsed after its defeat in the First World War. Moldavia and Wallachia would find themselves tributary states of the Ottoman Empire during this expansion, whilst the Voivodate of Transylvania would become a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Eventually, however, during the Russo-Turkish War of 1878, Moldavia and Wallachia would rebel and unite to become Romania, later adding Transylvania. During this time, Vlad would become a symbol of defiance and resistance as the Romanians broke free of the historical oppressors. Meanwhile, Vlad's image would take a different turn in Western Europe as Bram Stoker, reading up on the Wallachian voivode, spawned the vampire Dracula. Although Vlad was most likely only a partial inspiration for the bloodsucker, Bram Stoker's friendship with Henry Irving drawing the most inspiration. The reason the word Dracula came to mean devil may be because of Vlad's tyrannical image in the popular zeitgeist, leading to Bram Stoker's later mistranslation and eventually the popularization of the terminology. An incredibly complex figure, and if you dive into any historical figure, you're going to find something ghastly eventually, no matter how noble they are presented. I mean, none of them were really saints, aside from St. Olga of Kiev, who we've covered on this channel already. You should go and watch those two videos. Ultimately, the question of, was Vlad the Impaler a brutal, monstrous, tyrannical dictator? Or was he simply a ruler trying to protect his people from oncoming Ottoman onslaught and Hungarian subjugation? Was he a national hero for the Romanian people to rise up against their oppressors because of the standard he set? Was he a hero and a defender of Christendom? Or was he, like every other ruler, a complex person with complex intricate emotions that we couldn't comprehend ourselves because we didn't live his life? I think the answer is ultimately up to you. And more so, I think the answer is all of them. Now, for the real mushy bit, this is the outro and I am back, but I need your help. There is a little buy me a coffee link that I will have in the description, and you can, and I don't want anyone to maybe put in more than £1, and £1 from 700 of you would go a long way in allowing me to make these videos more often. However, the best way and the biggest way to support me is to simply like, subscribe, tap that bell icon to be notified of any videos I make, and comment down below. And also share. But liking and commenting is the biggest one to get me pushed out in the algorithm. And hopefully there should be a poll up with some more ideas of the next videos I want to do. I'm looking at the Serbian bottle incident, maybe Rasputin, a couple other ideas. I'll see what I put into the list of where I want to go, and you guys can vote on that, and that should be up by the time this video goes up. So yeah, just like, subscribe, share, comment down below what you thought about Vlad the Impaler, or what people you would like to see next, and until then, I'll see you in the next one. See you later, and God bless.